Good day. I am Raymond A. Whedon, President of the African American Archives Auxiliary of the Western Reserve Historical Society in Cleveland, Ohio. Today, I want to extend greetings to one of the founding members of the Auxiliary, Mr. Robert Prince Madison. Mr. Madison, the Auxiliary thanks you for saying yes 50 years ago to an invitation that went out in the Cleveland community to become part of what was known then as the Black History Project of the Western Reserve Historical Society. Now, 50 years later, that Black History Project is a full auxiliary of the museum known as the African American Archives Auxiliary.
Good, wonderful.
Mr. Madison, we simply want to honor your many years of dedicated support and participation in this auxiliary's achievements. We also want to thank you today for joining in this 50th anniversary celebration. Mr. Madison, we also want you to know that now in 2021, the auxiliary is committed to continuing to build upon the firm foundation established 50 years ago as this auxiliary continues to press forward and strengthening the auxiliary for the next 50 years and beyond of recognizing, documenting, and celebrating Black achievement in the Northeast Ohio area. With that being said, Mr. Madison, we welcome you to this broadcast.
And I'm quite honored to be here.
Mr. Madison, thank you so much. We'll go ahead and get started with our discussion of Designing Victory, which of course is the title of your memoir, and Building Community, the role of architects in helping us as human beings create these communities of memory. And you've been very generous in sharing information about your life story, beginning with your birth here in the city of Cleveland, your various travels across the country, around the world, and back home to Greater Cleveland, Ohio. But I wanted to start our discussion today by asking you, please, to talk about your community of faith.
Well, thank you very much for asking me, and thank you very much for having me on this program. I'm delighted to be here. In terms of my faith, I can say to you that when I was very young, we lived in the South for a while. My father was a professor at Selma University and at Benedict College. And living in the South, the important part of life there was church, because most African Americans were restricted to certain kinds of areas, so the church was the foundation. And I think that during the Depression, and it was very difficult, we were, my father was an engineer, and as an engineer, he taught school at university, but none of the industries would hire him because we don't hire colored people. During the 1929 to 1930s, life was pretty difficult for me and my family. We were evicted from a house because we couldn't pay the rent. It was then that my mother, who was a devout Christian, said, look, you know what, we're gonna pray. And we began she led us, I had 3 brothers. We get on our knees and pray every night, even though sometimes we didn't have food. But my mother was really the inspiration, because I recall that during those periods, we didn't have food, and Mother would say, well, the Lord is testing you. And with that kind of a spiritual, okay, Lord, God's testing us, we're gonna be good. So we developed, all of us, in terms of believing, and I mean really believing that, okay, Lord's gonna be good. Lord's gonna take care of it somewhere down the line. So that was really the beginning of, and when we made it. We came through the Depression, and we were in Cleveland, Ohio by that time. My father finally got a job at the War Department in Cleveland, Ohio, and things got to be a little bit better. But I can tell you, I lived in the projects, the housing projects, because we didn't have the sums to do that sort of thing. But I really believe that it was a faith. And I can tell you this, look, I don't know how much time I have, but I'm gonna tell you one story. During the war, I was in war, I was second lieutenant. I was leading a command in the 92nd Division, the Buffalo Soldiers. And just briefly, I'll go right through to the time when on December the 26th, 1944, I was supposed to be at battalion headquarters at 11 o'clock a.m. that morning. Well, this is the day after Christmas. I went to get the driver of my Jeep, and he'd been celebrating all night, so he couldn't drive. I said, I will drive the Jeep. So I'm driving the Jeep by myself up this mountain road to a place called Summer Colonia. And as I was making the turn around there, the Germans spotted me, fired an 88 millimeter gun, and hit the Jeep, threw me out up against the mountain. The Jeep went hurling down the road, down into the valley and crushed. About 100 yards up, a group of soldiers saw me, came down, picked me up, carried me, and took care of I couldn't walk because the shrapnel hit my foot. But later on, I used to get sick every day, every time at Christmas time I get sick. A psychiatrist said, let's think about this. I remember saying, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. This was a circular valley. And as I think back upon it now, I used to get sick all that time. I remember, if that outpost had not been 100 yards up and seen me, I would have bled to death because I couldn't walk. It hit my left foot. And there was just a mountain road. If the driver had been driving the car and I was sitting where I was supposed to sit, the shell hit that side, I'm gone. If they had missed totally, and I kept on up the hill, I would have been killed because most of the 92nd people were destroyed that time. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, it came back to me. And that's where that really was a fundamental basis that I do believe very strongly that there is a God out there. And by George, when you walk through that valley of the shadow of death, as I have, and think about all the things that could have happened, but didn't, gotta be him. That's my faith, okay?
Well, thank you so much. The next area that I want to focus on is the academic community and those communities of memory that are associated with the campus, especially of this historically Black college in Washington, D.C., Howard University, and two structures in particular that get a lot of attention, even from people who never took a class at Howard, like me. If they pledged one of the Divine Nine sororities or fraternities, they know something, they think, about Rankin Chapel, and maybe they think they know something too about Founders Library. But can you tell us, are there any special memories, any fond memories that you have about particular structures on the campus of Howard University?
All of them. But first of all, my father graduated from Howard University in 1922. So when I graduated from high school, Howard was the place I wanted to go because number one, they taught architecture there, and my father had been there. So we got to Howard. And yes, indeed, first of all, when I got to Howard University, Cook Hall had just been completed. That was a dormitory for boys or men, that time, men's dormitory. And it happens that Paul Williams is an architect from California, Black architect. He designed Cook Hall. And so for us to move into Cook Hall was just beautiful. That was the first dormitory been built at Howard University, I think in 25 or 30 years. but at Cook Hall. Then there was Founders Library, which was a place not only where it was a library, but it was also the art gallery was attached to that. I spent a lot of time in the art gallery. That was like the signature building on the campus at Howard University, Founders. And it was where we always stood when we had to have a great picture taken. The chapel was really something very special. It's a beautiful building. And we used to worship in there. And I worshiped there. I'd come from a place where my mother said, you can go to church every day. So I was at the chapel every Sunday. And then we had Vespers. Howard Thurman was the dean of the chapel. When he would speak, it was just incredibly beautiful. Howard Thurman was one of the great orators of our time. And I will never forget Howard Thurman. And then the last thing, not the last thing, but one thing I will say about the chapel is that I took upon myself a wife. And we got married in the chapel at Howard University in 1949. That's Howard University. And I became a member of the faculty for a couple of years. I used to go back there. And now Howard is really, well, it was the capstone. At that time, we called it the capstone of Negro education back in those days. This is before you were born. I'm talking about the 40s. I'm talking about the 40s, 30s, and the 40s. That's a long time ago, yeah. But anyway, that's Howard University. That's the chapel, and I remember vividly. That was it. Well, I am who I am because of them. I'm very grateful to them. My father was a brilliant man, but he was treated very badly. He was very badly treated because they wouldn't hire him. We don't hire colored people. We don't hire black engineers. So I remember the time when he had a job as a caddy at a white golf club. And I thought my father was there. My mother went to Morris Brown. She graduated. It's unusual back in those days, black people, husband and wife, to graduate from those schools. It also happens that both of them, their parents had divorced, and so they were pretty much alone as themselves growing up, and they got married. My mother and father were tremendous people. I mean, really, everybody thinks their parents are tremendous, but my mother was, she was there when things were low. When you bring all this back, I'm 97 years old now. You're taking me back, way back, which is very good. I'm enjoying that very much. So that's about that.
I would like to have you state your wife's name for the record.
Oh yeah. Leatrice Madison.
Yes.
Leatrice Branch Madison. She grew up in Washington, D.C. and went to Minor Teachers College. And she was, back in those days, black women were not expected to go very far. But she was determined. She got a master's degree. She got a first degree from Minor Teachers College and a master's degree from University of Chicago back in 1943. And I quoted her from Howard University, went away to war, came back, and looked up again. She was engaged with somebody else, but I came back and we talked about it. So she ditched this other guy and we got married. We were married for 6 or 7 years. Oh, she was a power. I mean, she was the one. For example, when I wanted to start my practice, people say, you're crazy. Who ever heard of a black architect? Well, that may be true. But so she went to work teaching school. And those first years of my practice, I could have survived. You can't survive without some support. So it was Leatrice who supplied money by teaching school for me to get started. Then we went on. And as we went on, she continued to be supportive of all this. So no, there's nothing I can't say. She was the pillar. She was that power I had, that pillar I had behind me. Every man should have one.
Now, Mr. Madison, I read in your book that Mrs. Madison also accompanied you when you had your Fulbright fellowship in France. So can we talk a little bit about your communities of memory in the international community, certainly there in France and also in French West Africa?
You have, you read my book. Thank you.
Yes, it did.
Life has been good. I've been very, very fortunate. It happens that I didn't get a good education at Western Reserve University. They didn't want me there. They got rid of me. I never took the fifth year at Western Reserve University. So I came out, studied. My wife was there and after dinner, every evening I studied for the state board examination. That's the examination you have to have in order to be called an architect. So for 2 years, I studied every night after dinner, literally there watching me, for the state board examination, and went down in 1951 and took it and passed it. And that was a shock to most of the people in the area because who ever heard of a black architect? Anyway, they heard of one now. So I got to Harvard, and it was admitted by Walter Gropius. That was a master's class. That was a great place. But then we went to Paris, and it happens she was working in the library of the School of Architecture and ran across this advertisement for Fulbright fellowships. And she came back and said, why don't we apply? I said, apply? You're going to Paris? And she said, yeah, well, so anyway, I said, okay, so we applied. And sure enough, a year later, 6 months later, I received the fellowship to study in Paris. That was a wow time because I just graduated from Harvard. I got a job teaching at Howard University. My first child was born. Jean was born in July, and we heard that we had this fellowship the next month. And well, we got a 2-month-old baby. Here's a place in Paris we've never been before. What am I going to do? My mother-in-law said, you're nuts. You shouldn't go. Let's just say, oh, we're going. We're going. I said, okay, we're going. So I studied French all that summer at Howard to get ready. And we got on the boat and went to Paris and had a wonderful time. It was a different, I spoke French by that time. By that time, I was pretty good. And we lived at the Avenue Jean Latour in Paris, right down from the Arc de Triomphe. And I loved it. We loved it. It was a great place. And I studied with Eugene Fresinet and Le Corbusier. These are the giants of architecture at that time. And it was not a class that had to go to every day, but a kind of a studio atmosphere that we would talk about architecture. And I really learned an awful lot there. And I loved in Paris. And since I spoke the language, we would go all over Paris. And then while there, I was advised by the professor at École des Beaux-Arts that I should go to Italy and to Scandinavia to look at the pre-stressed concrete establishment they had there. So I traveled to there. But then, and I had a wonderful, Paris was just great, beautiful at that time. So I came back and I was practicing, opened my office in 1954. And at that time, the African countries were getting their independence, being free, colonialism was being stopped. And the United States government said, well, if we're going to have free country, we got to have an establishment, we got to have an embassy. And therefore, they had to establish an embassy, but they had to have a building to house the embassy in. We got to get an architect. I said, wow. So they somehow, I don't know, they got my name down Washington, D.C., State Department. But they called me, sent me a letter, asked me if I would be interested. Sure enough, I would be interested. So I went to Washington to be interviewed the first time, passed. Then the second time. And I had to be fluent because I didn't know where they were going to send me at that time. But they finally decided they would send me to Dakar, which is the French West Equatorial Africa. and they spoke French there. It used to be French. So I took a rapid fire course that summer from the same teachers who had taught me earlier to study French. And so I studied French that summer. And because I could speak French, I knew the metric system. The State Department selected me to go to Dakar, Senegal, West Africa. Well, that was just great. That was not only the chance to travel again, but to design an embassy? How many embassies are there? Anyway, so they selected me after it wasn't just that easy. I had to submit boards and drawings and all kinds of interviews. And they thought, okay, he's our man. So I went to Dakar, Senegal. That was wow. That was really, it was fast. It was example. In Paris, every time we walked down the street, I was in Italy. Hey. I went to Dakar, Senegal. Nobody looked at me. I looked like everybody else. There was nothing unique about me. And I got uneasy saying, I'm here, don't you know I'm here? They don't care. So I got along well in Dakar, Cote d'Ivoire, and that was met Mercer Cook. Mercer Cook was the ambassador to Senegal at the time I was there to design the American embassy. I had a wonderful time. Boy, it was great. And Dakar, had two cities. There was a city which was settled by the French, beautiful high-rise buildings, wonderful avenue. Then there was a Senegal that was pretty much like people usually have huts and traffic roads.
I hate to take you away from Senegal, but I want to invite you to come back home to this other community of memory, Glenville, where there are people like A. Grace Lee Mims, where you established your first architectural firm, and certainly where the Madison building is now.
So they asked me to design this building, which was built on 105th Street. It was very nice. I really liked it. First time I had to learn what's the difference between gynecology and the other medicine. But I did, and Glenville was really the heartbeat of the whole Black community at that time. And 105th Street was where it was. 105th Street from Euclid Avenue all the way to St. Clair Avenue was filled with businesses that were occupied and owned by Black people. And it was a marvelous place. That was really the hub of it all, which we enjoyed very much. And that was the Glenville area. Schools were there, and it was just a wonderful place. I don't know much more I could say about it. I lived there. We lived on Orville Avenue, and we lived on 123rd Street.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I agree with what you said about Glenville. I was there just last week.
Really?
And again, by that building that used to be the Medical Arts Building, it's now called the Madison.
That's correct. It's called the Madison.
So, and that's wonderful. There's something else that's happening in Glenville too, at about the time that building is becoming available. There's a great high school, Glenville High School, and they have a great librarian whose name is Mrs. A. Grace Lee Mims.
Oh.
Yeah, so can you tell me about your friendship with Mrs. Mims and the love of the arts, including the Black arts, according to A. Grace Lee Mims?
Yeah, A. Grace Lee Mims had this program on every Wednesday, I think it was about either 9 or 10 o'clock, called the Black Arts, it was. And she would come on and describe the scene of Black history, as well as to play music, pretty much by Black either performers or artists. And I really got very excited about it and talked to her about it, and I became a sponsor of that program for several years, at which time A. Grace asked me to either have a few words before or after, which, I'm a corny character anyway. So I decided to write some stuff, some message, and I was, talking about Black history, Black people, what they could do. And it became a wonderful relationship between A. Grace Lee Mims and me and my office. And we supported for about 4 years, I think. And the A grade C member was a tremendous person, and she's a singer too. And I guess it happened that when I was at Howard University, Don Peterson on Saturday would listen to his radio, and I said, turn this stuff off. We did. He said, no, we'll turn it off. So they decided to have, and we started listening to the opera at Howard University. Well, it happens that we became members and believers in opera because we should turn this stuff off. But then we heard a singer who was performing Aida. And we said, wait a minute, this is by Ethiopia. And we started listening and we got hooked. And I was really involved in listening to the opera at Howard. Then when I went to war, after the war in Italy, that's all we went to was operas. I got to know Verdi, Puccini, and Mascagni, all those people. So when I came back to America, I still like to listen to the opera on Saturday. I still do. But A. Grade Lee Mem was performing operatic numbers, and she even sang them. She was a wonderful artist. She passed away not too long ago. But now A. Grade Lee Mem she was a leader in this community for the things that meant a lot in terms of the arts, the Black arts particularly. That was A. Grace Lee Mims.
Thank you again for sharing all of these wonderful memories about your faith community, the academic community, especially at historically Black college, Howard University, the international community. I don't know if Cleveland can compete with Paris, but I can love Cleveland and love Paris at the same time. But the Fulbright in the 1950s in Paris, France, and then having a hand in creating that embassy building in French West Africa, Dakar, Senegal. Sounds like you've had some fun, not just over there, but also over here in Glenville. Leontine Price, do you want to say something more about your love for her music?
Can I tell you the story about Leontine? I loved it, And she was here performing in Cleveland, and she performed. After the performance, people lined up to get her autograph and things like that. So the performance was over, and all these people lined up, and I lined up too. All women except me. And then when I got up there, she looked at me like, what are you doing here, fella? I love it too. So I shook her hand and I told her how much I enjoyed her. And that was a wonderful night. Wonderful. I really liked that. Do you like opera? You like opera?
Well, okay, since you asked me, I heard you say Grace Mims was a great singer. Actually,
Yep.
Grace Mims was my voice teacher. And
Really?
yes. I love opera.
I just simply want to thank you for sharing a very fantastic story of a portion of your life. I was just enamored with all of your life experience, and I just wanted to say one of the things that really struck me this morning was the chord with the family. And this year's Black History Month theme is focused on the Black family. It's a representation, identity, and diversity. And all throughout this dialogue, you tied those knots of how important family is to our success. And I just simply want to thank you again for taking the time to share your life story or portion of your life story in this 50th anniversary of African American Archives Auxiliary.
Thank you and congratulations to the African American Archives for continuing. It's important, very important. And I'm glad to be here. Call me anytime. We can talk anytime, okay?
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
again, President Whedon, and thank you so much, Mr. Madison. Happy Black History Month to both of you.
Thank you all. It's been a wonderful interview. I've enjoyed this very much.
So can I quote you on that? That this was a wonderful interview and you enjoyed it very much. Can I?
It really was. It really was.
The African American Archives of the Western Reserve Historical Society was founded in 1970 to collect and preserve and make accessible materials that document African American life, history, and culture. The African American Archives Auxiliary, Quad-A, founded the following year, supports the Archives' mission to promote appreciation for the role of African Americans in local U.S. history. WHRS is honored to have the Dr. A. Grace-Lee Mims collection as a part of the African American Archives, host for WCLV's The Black Arts for over 40 years, and one of the founders of Quad A alongside renowned architect Robert P. Madison. Mims is one of the countless remarkable individuals represented in the archives. For more information, please visit www.wrhs.org.